It's funny, the things you get used to. The little routines, the background noises, the things that would probably drive a normal person crazy, but for you, they just become the soundtrack to your life. For me, that soundtrack was my next-door neighbors. My name is Clara. I'm a freelance graphic designer, which is a nice way of saying I spend about 10 hours a day in a silent room, staring at a screen, fueled by coffee and the looming dread of deadlines. I live alone in a small, two-story house in one of those suburban neighborhoods that look identical whichever way you turn. Neatly trimmed lawns, minivans in the driveways, the occasional golden retriever barking at a squirrel. It's quiet. Or it was supposed to be. The house to my left was occupied by the Miller family, Mark and Helen, and their two kids, Sophie and Liam. You have to understand, they weren't bad people. I don't think they were. They were just loud. Loud in a way that defied the laws of physics. Their noise had a physical presence. It seeped through the drywall, vibrated up through the floorboards, and became as much a part of my house as the old pipes that groaned in the winter. My workday started not with an alarm clock, but with the 7 a.m. shriek. It was usually Liam, the younger one, who was about 3. It was a unique sound, a high-pitched, piercing wail that meant he either wanted goldfish crackers or had just discovered a fundamental injustice in the universe, like his socks being a slightly different shade of blue. This was immediately followed by the booming saccharine sounds of cartoon theme songs, turned up to a volume that I assume was meant to be heard from orbit. Then came the parents. Mark and Helen's arguments were another staple. They weren't the scary, plate-smashing kind of fights. They were the mundane, soul-crushing arguments of tired people. "I told you we were low on milk, Mark." "Well, I had the late shift, Helen. When was I supposed to go?" "You could have stopped on the way home." Their voices weren't just raised. They were perpetually strained, like they were trying to talk over the din their own lives created. In the afternoons, I'd get Sophie, who was maybe 7, and her recorder. She was learning Hot Cross Buns, over and over. Each note was a tiny, airy screech that drilled directly into my prefrontal cortex. That, or the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a basketball being dribbled relentlessly against their garage door, which was conveniently located right below my office window. I complained once. Just once, early on when I first moved in, I ran into Helen by the mailboxes. She was juggling Liam on her hip while trying to stop Sophie from running into the street. Her hair was in a messy bun, she had a faint stain of what looked like yogurt on her shoulder, and the dark circles under her eyes told a story of profound exhaustion. "Hey, Helen," I started, trying to sound as friendly and non-confrontational as possible. "I was just wondering, the TV in the mornings, it's a little, well, it's pretty loud." She looked at me, and for a second, I saw her face just crumble. Not in an angry way, but in a defeated way. "Oh God, I'm so sorry, Clara," she said, her voice breathy. "It's Liam. He won't. If the TV isn't on, he just screams. Non-stop. I'm so sorry. We'll try to keep it down." And looking at her, this shipwreck of a woman who was just trying to survive until nap time, I felt like a complete asshole. No, it's okay," I said quickly. "Honestly, I get it. I can just put on headphones." I never mentioned it again. I bought a pair of noise-canceling headphones and just accepted it. The noise was a sign of life. A chaotic, irritating, headache-inducing sign of life. But a sign nonetheless. It was the constant drone that let me know the world outside my quiet little office was still spinning. It was, in its own weird way, normal. Until the Tuesday it wasn't. I woke up on my own. No alarm, no shrieking toddler, no cartoon jingles. Just the gentle, pale light of morning filtering through my blinds. I lay there for a minute, waiting. My body was tensed, subconsciously braced for the daily auditory assault. But nothing came. The silence was so complete it felt loud. I could hear the faint hum of my own refrigerator downstairs. The whisper of the wind in the big oak tree in my front yard. A bird chirping somewhere down the street. It was bizarre. I got out of bed, a slow smile spreading across my face. Maybe they'd finally gone on vacation. Maybe Helen had won the lottery and they'd moved to a private island. I went downstairs, and the simple act of making coffee felt luxurious. The clink of the mug on the counter, the gurgle of the machine, the soft thud of the fridge door closing. These were sounds I hadn't heard, not really, in years. They hadn't been drowned out by the Miller's personal brand of chaos. I took my mug to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. And I worked. God, did I work. The focus was incredible. No hot cross buns. No thumping basketball. No muffled arguments about who forgot to take out the recycling. It was pure, unadulterated peace. I felt a surge of something I was almost ashamed to admit was pure, selfish joy. Finally, I whispered to myself, taking a sip of coffee. A day of quiet. The day drifted by in a haze of productivity and tranquility. I finished a big project 2 days ahead of schedule. I ate lunch on my back porch, listening to the birds instead of Sophie throwing a tantrum because her sandwich was cut into squares instead of triangles. It was, without a doubt, the most peaceful Tuesday I'd had since I moved in. But as the afternoon sun began to dip below the rooftops, casting long shadows across my lawn, the silence started to change. It was no longer peaceful. It was empty. It felt less like a gift and more like a void. The constant noise had been a presence, and its absence was now a presence of its own. A heavy, peaceful. I found myself pausing, listening, not for anything in particular, just listening, my ears strained, searching for the familiar sounds that weren't there. No sound of their minivan pulling into the driveway, no slamming car doors, no shouting of, "I'm home!" By the time night fell, the feeling wasn't joy anymore. It was a low, simmering curiosity that was quickly curdling into something else. Something that made the hairs on my arms prickle. I made dinner, the scrape of my fork on the plate sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. I turned on my own TV, just to fill the space, but I kept the volume low, as if I was afraid of missing something. Later, as I was brushing my teeth, I walked over to my bedroom window, the one that faced their house. It was habit, I guess. Their cars were both there, a silver sedan and a dark blue SUV, parked exactly where they always were. And through a gap in their living room curtains, I could see a light was on, a warm yellow lamp, casting a soft glow into the room. It was the same lamp they left on every single night. Everything looked normal. The cars were there. The light was on. All the visual cues of a family at home were in place. But the silence. It was absolute. Total. Not a murmur, not a footstep, not the faintest hint of a television. It was like looking at a photograph of a house. Not a real one where people lived and breathed and made noise. The contrast between that warm, living light and the dead, profound silence was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It sent a little shiver, cold and sharp, right down my spine. "That's weird," I murmured to the empty room, my own voice startling me. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe they were all sick with the flu and were sleeping. Maybe they'd gone out to a late movie, though that seemed unlikely on a Tuesday, with 2 small kids. Maybe Mark had finally convinced Helen to invest in some really, really good headphones for the entire family. Yeah, that was probably it. I pulled my blinds shut, but I couldn't shake the image from my mind. The light in the silent house. It was just the first day. A quiet, peaceful, wonderfully productive day. But looking back now, I realized that the dread didn't start on the 3rd day, or even the 2nd. It started right then, in that moment. The feeling that the normal, noisy world I knew had been switched off, and something else, something quiet and unknown, had been switched on in its place. Wednesday morning was worse. The peace from Tuesday had completely evaporated, and what was left in its place was a thick, heavy blanket of quiet. It wasn't just the absence of noise anymore. It felt like an active presence, a smothering force. I woke up with my ears already straining, listening for something, anything. The creak of their front door, the rumble of Mark's SUV starting up. Even Liam's 7 a.m. shriek would have been a relief. It would have been normal. But there was nothing. Just the same low hum of my own house. The same distant bird. It felt wrong. This was day 2. I couldn't work. I tried. I really did. I sat at my desk, pulled up the files for a new logo project, and just stared at the screen. My own silence, the one I used to crave, now felt like a cage. Every few minutes, my head would snap up, my fingers freezing over the keyboard. Did I hear something? A footstep? A muffled cough? No. It was just the house settling. My own pulse thumping in my ears. The silence from next door was so profound it was creating phantom sounds in my own head. It was making me paranoid. I got up and walked to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. The street was the picture of suburban tranquility. A guy was walking his beagle. A woman was loading groceries into her trunk. And there, in the driveway next to mine, sat the Millers' 2 cars, the silver sedan and the dark blue SUV. Right where they'd been yesterday. Right where they always were. You see, that was the part that was really starting to get to me. If they'd gone on vacation, a sudden family trip or something, the cars wouldn't be there. Mark used the SUV for work, and Helen used the sedan for battling the chaos of her life, I guess. She was always in and out of it, hauling kids, groceries, sports equipment. For both cars to be sitting there, cold and still, for 2 straight days, it didn't track. So I started to build scenarios in my head. It's a thing I do when I'm anxious. I try to logic my way out of the fear. Scenario 1. They were all sick. Really sick. Like a monster flu that had knocked the whole family out flat. It was possible. But even then, not a single sound, not a TV on low, not a parent groaning as they stumbled to the bathroom. The Millers weren't the type to suffer in silence. Their suffering was usually broadcast at full volume. Scenario 2. This was some kind of bizarre passive-aggressive response to me. To my one single complaint about the noise months ago. Maybe Helen had finally snapped and decided, "Oh, you want quiet, Clara? I'll give you quiet." It was a ridiculous thought, I knew it was. The kind of self-centered panic that makes you the main character in everyone else's story. But the thought crept in anyway, making my skin feel tight and prickly. I spent most of the day pacing, from my office to the kitchen to the living room window and back again. I'd stand perfectly still, holding my breath, tilting my head, trying to catch a whisper of life through the wall. Nothing. The silence was a solid physical barrier. It was impenetrable. By late afternoon, the anxiety had curdled into a genuine, stomach-churning worry. This wasn't just weird anymore, it was verging on scary. These were people. A family with 2 little kids. For them to just cease to exist, sonically speaking, felt like a glitch in the Matrix. An error in the code of my daily life. I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was worse than any horrible recorder solo. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, my thumb hovering over Helen's contact info. My heart was thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. What do I even say? "Hey, are you guys dead in there, or just really committed to a nap?" I typed and deleted a dozen different messages. I didn't want to sound like a nosy, crazy neighbor. I just wanted a sign of life. Finally, I settled on something I hoped was casual enough. "Hey Helen, it's Clara from next door. Just checking in, everything okay? Been super quiet the last couple of days. Hope you guys are all good." I hit send before I could second-guess myself again. I watched the phone like it was a bomb. The message showed, delivered. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Okay, her phone was on. That was something. I put my phone down on the counter, screen up, and went to the fridge to get a drink of water, trying to act normal, trying to pretend my entire nervous system wasn't focused on that little glass rectangle. I was mid-sip when it happened. I glanced at the phone. The word delivered under my message flickered and changed. It was now 2 little blue checkmarks, and the word read. Instantaneously. The moment it happened, a wave of relief washed over me. It was so intense it almost made me dizzy. "Oh, thank God," I whispered to the empty kitchen. She saw it. They were okay. She was probably just busy with the kids and would reply in a minute. She was probably rolling her eyes, thinking, "God, this neighbor is so nosy, and I didn't even care." All that mattered was that someone was on the other end of that message. The silence was broken. So I waited. I finished my water and put the glass in the sink. I leaned against the counter, scrolling idly through social media on my phone, but my eyes kept flicking back up to the top of the screen, to the conversation with Helen. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The blue check marks just sat there, staring at me. Okay, no big deal. She's busy. Liam probably spilled something, or Sophie needed help with homework. Totally normal. I decided to give her space. I went into the living room and turned on the TV, putting on some dumb reality show I didn't care about, just for the noise, but I kept the volume low. My phone was on the coffee table, right in my line of sight. 5 minutes. 10. The blue check marks remained. Unwavering. Unanswered. The relief I'd felt just a few minutes earlier was gone, and something else, something cold and slick, was sliding into its place. A new kind of dread. This was different from the dread of the unknown, This was worse. The unknown suggests absence. An empty house. A family on a trip they forgot to mention. But read means presence. It means someone was there. Someone was holding that phone in their hand, in that silent house. They saw my words. They saw my name. They saw that I was worried. And they chose not to answer. They chose the silence. The silence wasn't an accident anymore. It wasn't a byproduct of them being gone or asleep. It was a decision. A deliberate, conscious act. I turned the TV off. The fake chatter from the show felt obscene now. The real silence, the one from next door, rushed back in to fill the void, and it felt heavier than ever. Malevolent. I sat on my couch in the fading light of the afternoon, the gloom of my own living room growing deeper. For a solid 30 minutes, I did nothing but stare at my phone on the coffee table. At those two little blue check marks. They felt like two eyes, watching me from the screen. Who read that message? My blood ran cold. I thought of Helen, with her messy bun and her perpetually exhausted eyes. She always replied. Maybe not instantly, but she'd always send a quick, typo-filled text back. So SRY. Crazy day. All good. Something. Anything. The digital silence was so profoundly out of character, it felt like a scream. What if it wasn't her? The thought landed in my stomach like a stone. If Helen wasn't the one who read my text, then who was? Who was in that house, with her phone, looking at my message? Who was in there, in the dark, keeping the house so perfectly, horribly still? I picked up my phone, my hand trembling slightly. The screen illuminated my face in the dim room. There it was. Read. A confirmation of life that somehow felt like a confirmation of something far, far worse. I was no longer worried about a sick family. I was now terrified of a conscious presence. An intelligence that knew I was watching, knew I was listening, and was showing me, with a cold, digital indifference, that it didn't care. That my concern was nothing. That it was in control of the silence. I looked out the window again. The warm, yellow lamp in their living room flicked on, just as it had last night. An automated timer, probably. A little piece of normalcy, in a picture that was becoming more distorted and monstrous by the second. Everything looked the same on the outside, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it wasn't. Someone was in there. And they knew I was out here. I didn't sleep Wednesday night. I mean, I lay in bed, but it wasn't sleep. It was more like a long, 8-hour-long flitch. Every time a floorboard in my own house creaked, my eyes would snap open in the dark. My heart would start doing this frantic, thumping rhythm against my ribs. I kept listening. Listening for something to break the silence from next door. But the silence held. It was absolute. Unbreakable. Thursday was day 3. And on day 3, the worry was gone. The curiosity was gone. All the rational scenarios I had built in my head. The flu. A sudden trip. A weird passive-aggressive protest. They all just fell apart. They were flimsy excuses. And I knew it. What was left was pure, undiluted fear. The kind that sits low in your stomach like a cold stone. The blue checkmarks on my phone were a constant accusation. They proved presence. They proved consciousness. Someone was in that house, deliberately ignoring me, deliberately maintaining this horrifying quiet. I couldn't work. It was impossible. I sat at my computer and just stared at the wall my office shared with their house. It felt like I was sitting next to a morgue. A live morgue, if that makes any sense. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of a presence that was holding its breath. And I felt like I was holding my breath right along with it. The whole day was a wash. I paced. I drank coffee I didn't taste. I kept walking to the window, peering through the blinds. The silver sedan and the blue SUV were still there, unmoved, like gravestones. By the time the sun started to go down, a different feeling began to creep in. It was a grim sort of resolve. I couldn't live like this. I couldn't sit here for another night, jumping at shadows, my mind racing, just waiting. Waiting for what? For the silence to finally be broken by a scream? The not knowing was a specific kind of torture, and it was becoming worse than any possible truth. I had to do something. I knew it was a stupid idea. The kind of thing the girl in a horror movie does right before she gets killed. But I wasn't in a movie. This was my life, my neighborhood. These were, or had been, my neighbors. So I made a decision. I was going to go over there. I waited until it was fully dark, around 8:30. The street was quiet. The street lights cast long, yellow pools on the pavement. I went to my utility drawer and took out a small, heavy Maglite flashlight. I told myself it was just in case I needed to see, but truthfully, it felt better to have something solid and heavy in my hand. My own house felt enormous and silent as I walked to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt, and the sound of the metal bolt sliding back was like a gunshot in the quiet. I stepped outside onto my porch, and the cool night air hit my face. My heart was a frantic drum. I took a deep breath. It smelled like cut grass and damp earth. Normal smells. It was a bizarre contrast to the cold dread coiling in my gut. The walk across my lawn to their front walk felt like the longest walk of my life. Every crunch of a leaf under my shoes sounded deafening. I kept my eyes locked on their front door. It looked perfectly normal. They still had a faded pumpkin-shaped wreath on it from last Halloween. I stepped onto their concrete porch. It was cold. I stood there for a long moment, just listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the transformer on the utility pole down the street. My hand was shaking as I lifted it to the doorbell. I pressed it. The chime was obnoxiously cheerful, a tinny digital version of a song I didn't recognize. It echoed inside the house, and then nothing. The sound died, and the silence that rushed back in was deeper, more profound than before. It had an answer in it, and the answer was no. I waited a full minute. Then I knocked. 3 hard raps. "Helen?" I called out. My voice sounded thin, pathetic. "Mark? It's Clara, from next door. Is everything okay in there?" Silence. Absolute, total silence. My fear was now battling with a surge of anger. What the hell was going on? This was insane. I wasn't going to just walk away. Not now. I stepped off the porch and started walking along the side of the house, my sneakers sinking slightly into the soft grass. The blinds on most of the windows were drawn tight, but I knew the big picture window in their living room, the one that faced the side yard between our houses, sometimes had a gap. Helen was always complaining that one of the slats was broken. My flashlight beam cut a nervous, bouncing path in front of me. I felt exposed, like I was being watched from every dark window. I reached the side of the house, and there it was. The big window. And sure enough, just as I'd hoped, one of the vertical blinds was bent, leaving a dark 2-inch gap. I took another deep breath, my knuckles white around the flashlight. I switched it off, not wanting to announce myself with a sudden beam of light. The only light now was the dim, ambient glow from the street. It was enough. I leaned in close to the cold glass, pressing the side of my face against it, angling my eye to look through the gap. The room was dark, but not completely. The television was on, but it wasn't playing a show. It wasn't on a menu screen. It was pure, raw static. A roiling, chaotic storm of black and white pixels, hissing and popping with no sound. It was the only source of light in the room, and it cast a horrible, stuttering, sickly glow across everything. It made the familiar shapes of their couch and coffee table look alien and menacing. The light didn't illuminate, it convulsed. A child's toy, a red plastic truck, was lying on its side in the middle of the floor, and the strobing static made it look like it was twitching. The sight of it made my skin crawl. Why would anyone just leave a TV on like that? It felt wrong. Diseased. I scanned the empty room. Empty couch. Empty armchair. The room was still except for that manic, silent storm on the screen. My eyes adjusted more to the gloom, and I could see past the living room, into the darkness of the hallway and the base of the staircase that led to the second floor. It was a black void, a patch of absolute shadow, untouched by the TV's frantic light, and then I saw it. It wasn't something I processed right away. It was just a flicker of information my eye caught that my brain couldn't immediately understand. In that square of deeper darkness at the foot of the stairs, something moved. It was fast. Impossibly fast. A shape. A silhouette detaching itself from the deeper shadows. It was tall. Taller than Mark. And thin. So thin. It didn't walk or run. It just glided. A sliver of black against black, moving from one side of the hallway to the other, before disappearing completely. It was there for less than a second, a single frame in a nightmare. I didn't even have time to scream. The air left my lungs in a silent, choked gasp. My brain finally caught up with what my eyes had seen, and a wave of pure primal terror washed over me, so potent it felt like an electric shock. That wasn't a person. The way it moved, it wasn't human. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, and fell hard onto the damp grass. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I didn't even notice the pain. My only thought was escape. I scrambled up, my hands muddy, my knees screaming in protest. I didn't look back at the window. I couldn't. I just turned and ran. I ran blindly, cussing and sobbing under my breath, my legs pumping, my lungs burning. I ran across the dark yard, my own front door a distant golden beacon of safety. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely get the key into the lock. It felt like an eternity, me fumbling with the key, my back completely exposed to the silent house next door. I could feel it. I could feel whatever was in there watching me. Finally, the key turned. I threw myself inside, slamming the heavy wooden doors shut behind me. The noise echoed through my house. I didn't stop. I turned the deadbolt, the sound a satisfying, solid thunk. I fastened the chain lock. I ran to the back door and did the same. I checked every window on my first floor, making sure they were locked tight. Only when I was sure my house was a fortress did I allow myself to stop. I leaned with my back against the locked front door, sliding down to the floor, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I drew my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them, trying to make myself small. I was no longer just worried about my neighbors. I wasn't just investigating a strange silence. I had looked through a window into hell. There was something in that house, something living in the silence and the dark. And I had just announced, as clearly as if I'd screamed it through their mail slot, that I knew it was there. It had seen me. It had seen me looking. And the silence that now seeped through the wall from next door felt different. It was no longer a passive absence of sound. It was the patient, listening quiet of a predator. And it knew exactly where I lived. I don't know how long I stayed on the floor, huddled against the front door. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Time sort of dissolved. My whole world had shrunk to the solid wood at my back, and the deadbolt I could feel pressing into my spine. My house, which had always felt like a safe, cozy shell, now felt like a paper-thin box. A trap. Eventually, the shaking subsided into a low-level, full-body tremor. My teeth stopped chattering. But the cold wasn't from the night air. It was a deep internal freeze, the kind that starts in your bones and works its way out. I finally managed to get up, my legs stiff and unsteady like an old woman's. My first thought was that I couldn't stay by the door. It felt too close, too exposed. I didn't turn on any lights. The idea of flooding my house with light, making myself a visible target in a sea of darkness, was terrifying. I was a creature of the shadows now, just like it. I crept through my own home, using the faint, silvery moonlight filtering through the windows as my only guide. Every piece of furniture I'd picked out, every picture on the wall, seemed alien and threatening in the gloom. The coat rack in the hall looked like a tall, stooped man. A pile of laundry on a chair took on the shape of a crouching animal. My own house was turning against me. I ended up in the living room. I don't know why. Maybe it was some kind of morbid need to be close to the source of the fear. The wall my couch was pushed against was the wall I shared with their house, the wall of the morgue as I'd thought of it earlier. I sank into the cushions, pulling an Afghan blanket off the back of the couch and wrapping it tight around my shoulders. It still smelled faintly of my fabric softener, a scent of normalcy in the middle of a nightmare. I just sat there, and I listened. The silence was the main event. It wasn't just quiet. It was a physical thing. It pressed in on the windows, seeped through the walls, filled every corner of my house. It was so total that my own breathing sounded like a bellows, my own heartbeat a frantic drum solo against the stillness. I found myself trying to breathe more shallowly, to beat more slowly, as if to not disturb the oppressive quiet, as if not to be noticed. I stared at the shared wall. It was just drywall and paint, a few feet of insulation and wood studs, a completely ordinary barrier. But tonight, it felt like a membrane, a thin, permeable skin, separating my world from that other place. I kept seeing it in my mind's eye, that jittering, black and white static, throwing its spastic light on the furniture. And the shadow. The long, thin, impossibly fast shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. And it was right there, just on the other side of the wall I was leaning against. My mind raced, trying to find a hook for logic, for reason. Mark and Helen took a sudden trip, a family emergency. They left the TV on by accident. What I saw was a burglar. A tall, skinny burglar who moved like a phantom and was apparently content to just hang out in their dark house for 3 days straight. The explanations were so flimsy, so pathetic. They fell apart the second I formed them. I pulled the blanket tighter. The house was cold. I thought about the thermostat, but the thought of getting up, of moving, of making any noise at all, was paralyzing. So I just sat, a statue made of fear, and that's when I heard it. It came through the wall. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was so quiet that at first, I wasn't sure I'd heard it at all. It was a single, distinct sound. Cash. Dry. Sharp, like a single key being struck on an old, dusty piano. Or a bone snapping. My entire body went rigid. I stopped breathing. The air trapped in my lungs burned. I strained my ears, tilting my head, every nerve fiber focused on that wall. Was it a pipe settling, the house groaning? Ride. Silence. The deep, heavy silence rolled back in, filling the space the sound had made. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my terrified brain was just manufacturing noises now. God, I hoped so. Then it came again. Cash. Same sound. Same place. Coming from their living room. My heart, which had been pounding, did a painful lurch and then seemed to stop altogether. It was real. This was a real sound. I waited. 1 second. 2. 3. Cash. Another one. A pattern was forming. I started counting the seconds in my head. A frantic, silent count. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4. Cash. It was rhythmic. Perfectly, unnervingly rhythmic. About every 4 or 5 seconds. It was a mechanical sound, devoid of any emotion, any life. It wasn't the sound of someone working on something. It wasn't the sound of someone rummaging around. It was a process. A mindless, repetitive action. Cash. What was it? I pictured a single finger, maybe just a long, sharp fingernail tapping on the hardwood floor. Over and over. Tap. Wait. Tap. Wait. Why? What kind of person does that? The image of the thin, gliding shadow filled my mind again. This wasn't a person. This was its sound. This was the sound of the thing that lived in the silence. Cash. The sound was starting to drill into my brain. It was worse than a scream. A scream is human. A scream has a beginning and an end. It's an explosion of terror. This was the opposite. It was the slow, methodical, patient sound of something that had all the time in the world. Something that wasn't scared. Something that just was. Cash. I had to get away from the wall. I had to get my phone. I needed to call someone. The police? What would I say? Hello, my neighbor's house is quiet and I heard a tapping sound? They'd think I was a lunatic. Still, the thought of my phone, a connection to the sane world, was a powerful lure. It was on the kitchen counter. Not far. But it felt like miles. Slowly, agonizingly, I started to move. I tried to peel myself off the couch cushions without making a sound. I unwrapped the blanket from my shoulders inch by inch, the soft wool whispering against my clothes. My muscles screamed in protest. I felt like I was moving through molasses. Cash! The tapping continued, a relentless metronome for my terror. I finally got my feet onto the floor. The carpet muffled my movement, thank God. I stood up, my body crouched low, like a burglar in my own home. I took one slow, deliberate step towards the arched doorway that led to the kitchen. Cash! My eyes were locked on the wall, as if I could see through it, as if I could see the thing making the noise. I took another step. My weight shifted, and my bare foot came down on a section of the floor I knew all too well. It was the spot right by the edge of the rug that always complained when you stepped on it. Creak. The sound was an explosion. A gunshot. It wasn't loud in the grand scheme of things, but in that absolute, suffocating silence, it was a cataclysm. A betrayal by my own house. I froze instantly, my foot still half on the board, my body locked in a ridiculous, strained pose. Every muscle in my body went taut. My blood turned to ice water. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle the gasp that tried to claw its way out of my throat. And from the other side of the wall, silence. The tapping had stopped. It didn't fade out. It didn't slow down. It just ended, in the middle of a beat. The next cash, the one that was due to happen in about 2 seconds, never came. I stood there, A statue of pure dread, counting the seconds in my head again. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 4, 5, nothing, 10 seconds, a minute, nothing but that heavy, pressing silence. But it was a different silence now. Before, it had been the vacant, empty quiet of a place where nothing was happening. Now, this was the silence of something that had been interrupted. It was a focused, attentive silence. It wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. It had heard me. The tiny creak of a floorboard had traveled through the carpet, through my floor, through the studs and insulation in the wall, and into the room where it sat. And it had stopped its mindless tapping to listen. A cold certainty washed over me, so absolute and terrifying it almost brought me to my knees. It knew I was here, right here, on the other side of this wall, holding my breath, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The hunter had heard the twigs snap in the forest, and now it was perfectly still, its head cocked, its senses aimed directly at the source of the sound. Aimed directly at me. It knew exactly where I was. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, half crouched, one foot on that traitorous floorboard. My body was a knot of screaming muscles, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but listen to the silence on the other side of the wall, and it was listening back. You have to understand, this wasn't just the absence of noise anymore. This was an active, predatory silence. I could feel it. It was like standing in a dark field and suddenly realizing the chirping of the crickets has stopped because a wolf is nearby. The silence was the warning. The sound wasn't the scary part. The moment the sound stopped, that was the scary part. It knew. It heard my house creak. It knew there was a warm, breathing, terrified person just a few feet away. And it was waiting. For what? For me to make another sound? For me to move? My mind, which had felt like it was running a marathon, just shut down. It went blank with a white-hot static of pure fear. There were no more theories about burglars or family emergencies. Those were comforting lies. And there was no room for comfort now. There was only me, and the listening thing on the other side of the wall. Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, I lifted my foot off the creaking board. The movement was a liquid agony, every tendon stretched taut. I placed my foot back on the carpet with the care of a bomb disposal expert. And I waited again, my heart hammering a frantic, muffled rhythm against my ribs. Still nothing. The silence held. My bedroom. I had to get to my bedroom. It had a lock. A flimsy residential-grade lock that a child could probably pick. But it was a lock. It was a barrier. My phone was still on the kitchen counter. God, the kitchen. To get there, I had to cross an expanse of open floor. It felt like trying to cross a sniper's kill zone. I decided against it. The phone wasn't worth it. The lock was everything. With my back pressed against the wall, the other wall, the one that faced the safe, empty street, I began to inch my way towards the staircase. Every step was a negotiation. I tested the floor with my toe before putting any weight down. The house was a minefield of creaks and groans I'd never noticed before. The Afghan blanket was still clutched in my hand, a useless, soft talisman against the dark. I reached the bottom of the stairs. I glanced back at the shared wall. It was just a plain, white wall in the gloom. Innocuous. Nothing about it suggested it was the membrane between life and whatever that was. But I could feel its attention on me, a psychic pressure that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Going up the stairs was the worst part yet. Each step was a new opportunity for a catastrophic noise. I went up on all fours, like an animal, distributing my weight as best I could. My own breathing was a roar in my ears. The seventh step always creaked. I'd lived here 2 years, I knew its secrets. I stretched my leg, skipping it entirely, my muscles screaming at the awkward angle. I made it to the top. The small landing was a victory. My bedroom door was just a few feet away. I practically fell into the room, my hand fumbling for the door. I didn't slam it. I pulled it shut with a reverence I usually reserved for nothing. I'd never been this careful in my life. The latch clicked into place with a sound that was both thunderously loud and deeply, deeply comforting. I turned the lock. The snick of the bolt sliding home was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. For a second, just 1 second, I let myself believe I was safe. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my whole body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. I was locked in. It was out there. A door separated us. I was still trying to get my breathing under control, my eyes squeezed shut, when I heard it. It wasn't a creak. It wasn't a tap. It was a sound that didn't belong. A sound from outside. From my downstairs. Crash, tinkle, thump. The unmistakable, explosive sound of a window shattering. My blood didn't just run cold, it felt like it evaporated. One moment I was a living person. The next I was a hollow shell filled with nothing but ice and a shrieking, silent scream. It wasn't next door anymore. It hadn't been tricked. It hadn't given up. While I was sneaking up my own stairs, it had just gone around. It was in my house. The idea of safety, the comfort of the lock, it all dissolved into a pathetic joke. This wasn't a game of hide and seek. I was a mouse in a box, and the cat had just found its way inside. My phone. My stupid, useless phone was downstairs, on the kitchen counter, near the window. The window it just came through. It was as good as being on the moon. Panic. True. Animal panic finally took over. My brain just short-circuited. I scrambled across my bedroom floor, my hands slapping against the wood, and dove under my bed. It was a child's instinct, a primal urge to find the smallest, darkest space and disappear. The dust bunnies were thick under there. The air smelled of old wood and forgotten things. I pressed myself against the wall, pulling my knees to my chest, making myself as small as humanly possible. I could see the sliver of light under my bedroom door. That's where my world ended now. And I listened. Silence. The window was broken, a gaping hole into my home. But now there was only silence. It was inside. What was it doing? Was it looking for me? Did it know where I was? Then, the sound. A footstep. At the bottom of my stairs. It wasn't a normal footstep. There was a weight to it that was wrong. A heavy, dragging sound. And it was slow. So slow. Thump, drach. Another step. Thump, drach. It was coming up my stairs. My stairs. It was methodical. Patient. It wasn't in a hurry. It knew I was here. It knew I was trapped. The dragging sound was what got me. I pictured mud, or something thick and wet, being scraped along the wooden steps. Each step was a lifetime. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I buried my face in my knees, biting down hard on my own hand to keep from screaming. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and silent. I was going to die here, under my own bed, choking on dust and terror. Thumped, drag. It was on the landing now, just outside my door. The floorboards, the ones that had betrayed me before, didn't make a sound under its weight. It was too heavy, or maybe it just didn't step in the same way a person did. The silence returned, but it was a close, suffocating silence now. It was the silence of something standing perfectly still, right on the other side of the door. I was holding my breath, my lungs on fire, listening. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Then, a new sound, a tiny, metallic rattle. The doorknob. I watched, my eyes wide with a horror that was beyond words, as the brass knob began to turn. It moved with an unnerving, smooth slowness. No fumbling. No rattling. Just a deliberate, clockwise rotation. It turned until it couldn't turn anymore. It was testing the lock. It stopped. A long, agonizing pause. What was it thinking? Was it going to break the door down? The thought of that wood splintering, of the flimsy lock giving way, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Then, something happened that my brain simply could not process. Bang, 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 a frantic, desperate pounding on the door. Not the heavy, powerful strikes of a creature trying to break in. This was the flat-palmed, frantic drumming of a human being. And then, a voice I knew. Lamb! Oh God, Lamb, open the door, please! It was Mark. My neighbor, Mark. His voice was a shredded, hopeless wreck, stretched thin with a terror that dwarfed my own. It was him. It was really him. For a split second, a surge of insane, idiotic hope shot through me. He was here! He was back! He could help! I started to move, to crawl out from under the bed. Please, Lamb, open up! It's right behind me! His plea was cut short. It was replaced by a sound that will be burned into my memory until the day I die. It wasn't a scream. It was worse. It was a wet, tearing sound. A single, sickening R-R-R-R-I-P. Like a roll of thick, wet canvas being torn in half with incredible force. It was followed by a heavy, wet thump. The sound of a large sack of grain. No, a body. Hitting the floor. And then, silence. The absolute total and final silence of a finished thing. I was frozen under the bed. My mind was just a loop of that last sound. The rip. The thump. Mark's voice, cut off mid-plea. He hadn't been pounding on my door for me to let him in to save me. He was pounding on my door for me to let him in to save him. The thing on the stairs hadn't been coming for me. It had been hunting him. It had chased him across his own lawn, through my broken window and up my stairs. My locked door hadn't saved me. It had damned him. There was a dead man on my landing, just outside my bedroom. And the thing that had killed him was standing right over his body. The sliver of light under the door was uninterrupted. I imagined it standing there, in the dark, perfectly still, its task complete, listening, waiting. The silence from the other side of the door was the heaviest thing in the universe. It was the sound of death. And it was just inches away. I don't know how long I lay there under the bed, listening to the silence on the other side of the door. It wasn't a time you could measure in minutes. It was a thick, heavy substance. It had weight. It pressed down on the house, on my room, on my back. I was pinned in place by it, sure that if I moved even a fraction of an inch, it would notice. It was standing over him. Over Mark. I could picture it, this void in the shape of a person, just outside my door. It had finished its terrible business, and now it was just waiting. I don't think it was waiting for me. I was irrelevant. An insect. It was just done. My own breathing was a betrayal. I tried to swallow it, to hold it in my burning lungs, but it would leak out in tiny, shuddering gasps. The smell of dust and old wood under the bed was choking me. My tears had dried into crusty tracks on my cheeks. I was beyond crying. I was in a place beyond fear. It was a state of pure animal certainty, the certainty that a predator was near, and my only job was to be so still, so quiet, that I ceased to exist. Then a new sound cut through the world. It started faint, a thin whine from far away. For a second, my brain didn't even register it. It was alien, from another reality. But it grew louder, clearer. Woo, was siren, and then another, joining the first. My heart, which had been a frantic drum, gave a painful lurch. Hope is a violent, dangerous thing. It flooded my system like a drug, making me shake. The sirens were real. They were coming here. For me. The 911 call must have gone through, but with the hope came a new, sharper terror. What would it do? The thing standing on my landing. Would the sound of the approaching world make it angry? Would it finally turn its attention to the flimsy door separating us? I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the crash, for the splintering of wood. I saw the door flying off its hinges. I imagined a shape filling the doorway. But nothing happened. The sirens got louder and louder, a screaming wall of noise that filled the neighborhood. And the silence on the other side of my door remained absolute. It didn't move. It didn't react. It was as if the sirens and the world they represented didn't exist. Headlights washed across my window, painting strobing bars of red and blue light across the sliver of floor I could see from under the bed. Doors slammed outside. Heavy boots pounded on the driveway. Then, a man's voice, loud and full of authority, shattering the night. "This is the police! Open the door!" Silence. Still nothing from the landing. Bang, bang, bang. They were at my front door. The sound was deafening. A human, physical violence that was almost comforting compared to what came before. I heard the splintering of my front door jam. The house shuddered as they forced their way in. "Police! Clear!" Voices shouted downstairs. I listened, holding my breath. What about the landing? What about the thing? Footsteps on my stairs. Not the slow, heavy drag from before. These were quick, purposeful thumps. The sounds of men with guns. Men who belonged to the living world. Upstairs clear. Bedroom door is locked. I heard them try the knob. It rattled uselessly. I was still locked in. It was still out there. "Sir? Ma'am? This is the police. Are you in there?" I couldn't answer. My throat was welded shut. My body wouldn't obey. I was still just a petrified animal under a bed. "We're coming in." There was a moment's pause, then a single, precise kick. The door flew open and smacked against the wall. Light flooded the room. I flinched, burying my face in my arms. I heard them enter, their boots heavy on my floor. I could see their black pants and boots from my hiding spot. "Nobody," a voice said. Then another. "Check under the bed." A face appeared, upside down, silhouetted by the doorway light. A young officer with a kind, worried expression. "Ma'am? It's okay. We're the police. You're safe now." Safe. The word didn't mean anything. They had to pull me out. I was stiff, a statue made of terror. You see in movies where the rescued person collapses into the arms of the hero, crying with relief. It wasn't like that. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just trembled, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that started in my bones and radiated outward. One of them draped a blanket over my shoulders. It felt impossibly heavy. They led me out of the room. I tried not to look, but you always look. Just outside my door, on the landing, was a shape. It was covered with a different kind of blanket, a plain white sheet from the ambulance. But the sheet couldn't hide the shape of it, the human shape of it. And from beneath its edge, a dark, syrupy stain was spreading slowly across my hardwood floor. I was at the station for hours. I sat in a sterile little room, wrapped in that same blanket, clutching a styrofoam cup of water I couldn't drink. Different people came in and out. They were all very patient, very calm. They asked me the same questions over and over. I tried to tell them. I really did. It started 3 days ago, I'd say, my voice a croak. They just went quiet. The detective, a tired-looking man named Miller, would nod slowly. Right. The neighbors. The Harris family. I texted Hoa. That's Mark's wife. The text was seen. Instantly, but she didn't reply. The lights were on, but the house was dead. It was wrong. Okay. Seen but no reply. He'd write it down, but the look in his eyes. He was looking at a person in shock. A person whose mind was probably playing tricks on her. I saw a shadow, I insisted. And last night I heard this sound. A tapping. Like nails on the floor. It was in their house. Tapping, he repeated, his pen still. Then I told him about the window breaking. My window. How I hid. How I heard the slow, dragging footsteps coming up my stairs. And how Mark, poor Mark, had started pounding on my door, screaming for me to let him in. I told them about the sound. The final, wet, tearing sound. Miller shared a look with the younger officer. It was a look that said everything. They had a theory. A simple, logical theory that explained it all. Mark Harris came home alone. Maybe he was supposed to meet his family. Maybe he came back early from a trip. He walked into his house and surprised someone. A burglar. A squatter. The person was already there, had been there for a few days, which would explain the lights I saw. This person, this killer, chased Mark out of his own house. Mark ran for his life to the closest safe place he could think of. My house. He broke my window to get in, ran upstairs, thinking he could barricade himself in with me. But the killer was right behind him. He didn't make it. It made sense. It was clean. It explained the broken window, the body on my landing, everything. It was a horrible, tragic crime. A home invasion gone wrong. It was something they could write in a report. We breached the Harris residence, Miller told me gently. It's empty. No sign of Mrs. Harris or the children. No sign of a struggle there. We think they're probably still on vacation. Wherever they went, unaware of what's happened. We're trying to track them down. An empty house. It fit their theory. The killer had fled after it was over. Fled into the night. They let me go home with my parents, who had driven 3 hours in the middle of the night to get me. I didn't go back to the apartment. I couldn't. I knew, from the moment they pulled me out from under that bed, that I would never spend another night in that place. The next few days were a blur of sedatives and grief. My parents treated me like I was made of glass. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. R-R-R-R-I-P. Then the thump. And Mark's voice cut off. My locked door had been his tomb. The guilt was a physical thing. A sickness in my stomach. But underneath the guilt and the grief, there was something else. A cold, nagging piece of the puzzle that didn't fit into Detective Miller's neat little box. The text message being marked as, quote, seen. The rhythmic, patient tapping. The feeling of being watched by the house itself. A burglar doesn't do that. A burglar is quiet because they don't want to get caught. This was different. This silence was loud. It was a presence. It didn't matter. I had to move on. Or at least, move out. About a week later, my dad and I went back to the apartment to pack my things. The police tape was gone from my front door, but a new door had been installed. The landing was clean, scrubbed sterile, but I could still see the pale outline of the stain on the wood if I looked hard enough. The whole place felt wrong, violated. We worked in near silence, just the sound of boxes being taped up. I was on autopilot, throwing clothes and books into boxes, my mind a million miles away. My dad was handling the mail, which had piled up on the kitchen counter. Mostly junk. Catalogs, credit card offers, pizza flyers. "Hey, Lamb," he said, holding up a small rectangular card. "You got a postcard." I didn't even look up at first. Probably just junk mail. "No, it looks personal," he said, walking over. "From the Harris family." My blood ran cold. I dropped the stack of sweaters I was holding. I slowly turned and took the postcard from his hand. The front was a generic, glossy photo of a white sand beach, with impossibly blue water and a line of palm trees. The kind of place you see in a travel brochure. It was a world away from the gray, cold reality I was living in. I flipped it over. The postmark was from Ocean City, hundreds of miles away. My eyes scanned the date stamp. It had been mailed 4 days ago. That would have been 2 days before Mark was killed. The handwriting was Hoa's. Bubbly, neat, a little slanted. I read the words, and the floor fell away from under me. "Hi, Lamb. Decided to take a surprise trip with the kids. A whole week of sun. Sorry for all the noise lately. Guessing you're enjoying the peace and quiet now. Smiley face. We'll be back soon. Love, Hoa, Mark, and the kids." I stared at the cheerful little smiley face next to her words. They were all on vacation. The whole family. My dad saw the look on my face. "Lamb? Honey, what is it? Are you okay?" I couldn't answer. The postcard slipped from my numb fingers and fluttered to the floor. A single ice-cold train of thought plowed through the fog in my brain. If Hoa and the kids were on vacation with Mark, who was in their house for those 3 days? Who was turning the lights on and off? Who saw my text message? Who was standing in the living room, watching me through the window? A shadow on the stairs? Half. What was that sound? Tapping its fingernails on the floor, waiting patiently in the dark. And what in God's name was the thing that Mark came home to? The thing that chased him to my door? What? The police theory, my one anchor to a sane world, vaporized. This wasn't a burglary. This wasn't a tragic, random crime. This was something else. Something impossible. I looked out my kitchen window across the small patch of lawn at the Harris's house. It was dark, empty, silent. Just another house on just another suburban street. But it wasn't. It was a cage that had been briefly occupied. A shell. A horrible final realization settled in my soul. I had been terrified of what was in that house. I was wrong. I should have been terrified of the fact that it could leave. The police never found a suspect. The case went cold. But I knew the truth. It wasn't a person who could be found. It had finished what it was doing there, and had simply moved on. And as I stood there in my half-packed apartment, shaking in the afternoon sunlight, the only thing I knew for sure was that it wasn't in that house anymore, and I had absolutely no idea where it went.